Bible, the one written by human beings.
The thing is, there's no evidence of a second Bible. It's actually, you say it was written by the Bible I have is a translation. In translation, the same one that we have in the British Museum from the 4th century.
I come from Asia myself.
Hi everyone, so my name is Brother Ijaz Ahmed. I'm from Calling Christians, the Muslim Debate Initiative, and from the Muslim Apologetics podcast, as well as Blogging Theology and the Speakers Corner group on Facebook. So today I'm going to take a look at some statements by a street preacher. I'm not sure her theological background in respect to her education, but from the statements that she has made, some people have referred to people of her age as a girl. I prefer to refer to her as a woman. And so she made a couple statements, and she made three statements. Sorry, she made two statements, but there are three arguments from it. So this is Elizabeth Schofield from DCCI. One of the things I look for in missionaries is that when they go out to preach the word, that they have some semblance of understanding on what they're preaching about. You know, it doesn't make much sense to go out and preach to people something that you're ignorant about, but that is the case today. So she begins by saying there is no evidence of a second Bible. To begin with, there are many codices of the New Testament. No two codices will agree. In fact, if you read the guide to the NA28 by David Trubish, a lot of people appeal to him as a conservative scholar. I believe he argues that you can't find 2 pages of the New Testament that would agree across all of the pages that we have, across all of the manuscripts. So to begin with, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of versions of the Bible. And what we mean by Bible here is simply a collection of pages. So what we refer to as a codex. Now, a codex can have many differences between the books inside of the codex itself and with other codices. So for example, today you might have a King James Version Bible, and then someone else might have a New International Version Bible. These are based on earlier texts that have been collated and combined by scholars of different backgrounds, and they're translated based on these older medieval and sometimes ancient manuscripts. So there are versions of the Bibles out there when it comes to the codices as well as to the canon. So the canon is the authorized list of books. What we can say is, for example, the Bible, the New Testament has 27 books. So that canon is the number of books. And so different New Testaments could have different books. For example, Codex Sinaiticus, which she appeals to in a later statement, has 2 extra books. I believe one is the Epistle of Barnabas, and the second one of this is the Shepherd of Hermas, though in not a complete form. So she says that there is no evidence of a second Bible. This is absolutely demonstrably false. What I believe happened here is a Muslim gentleman approached her and mentioned that there were many versions of the Bible, and her immediate reaction was a psychological reaction, which we call reaction formation. So take, for example, you're in high school and, you know, you tell your friends I have a girlfriend, and your friends say, well, I've never seen you with that girlfriend. She doesn't exist. And you say, well, of course I have a girlfriend. She is in Canada or something like that. Or she's in Norway, or she's in Belgium. You know, you make up a lie on the spot so you can rebut the claim being made against you. And this, in psychological terms, is referred to as reaction formation. So the Muslim gentleman politely says to her that, you know what, there are many versions of the Bible, and her immediate response is a classical psychological response, which is there is no evidence of a second Bible. She then goes on to say, the Bible I have is a translation of the same one we have in the British Museum from the 4th century. Here she is referring to Codex Sinaiticus. So let's begin with the problems. The first problem is, she says, the Bible I have is a translation of that same one. The problem there being that no such translation exists of Codex Sinaiticus. There are different forms of the text of the New Testament that scholars look at. And when you take an ancient codex or a collection of manuscripts in one collection and you translate it and you note the changes, but you don't change what the manuscript says, you just merely translate it, that's called a diplomatic text, or the diplomatic edition of a text. That does not exist for the New Testament. In fact, if you go to codexsinaiticus.org, they mention quite literally, that they don't have a word-to-word translation of the text. So apparently Elizabeth Schofield from London has something that even the very scholars responsible for digitizing and studying Codex Sinaiticus do not have. So either that was an honest mistake or what I believe to be sincere deception on her part. It may be due to her ignorance, but like I said, it could just be she is in missionary mode and she wants to rebut any claims by Muslims. So she's not thinking rationally here. And this is typically normal behavior for people who have graduated out of a Pfander Center under J. Smith. So that's the first thing. She's got it wrong. There is no diplomatic edition of Codex Sinaiticus. And then she makes a third claim here, which is it's the same one we have from the British Museum from the 4th century. This is also demonstrably false. If it's the same one, then does her New Testament contain 29 and not 27 books? Does she have 7 extra books in her Old Testament like the Roman Catholics do, as is found in Codex Sinaiticus? The answer is obviously no. So the question here is, she has a ministry called DCCI. I think it's Defend Christ, Critique Islam. And the problem is, if you're going to defend Christ, I expect you to have some basic knowledge about what you're defending here. And unfortunately, it seems as if the book that she is preaching about, she has absolutely no basic knowledge about. In fact, in the university courses I've attended on the Bible, they would laugh her out of the building if she were to make such asinine claims like this. So again, to begin with, there is no word-to-word published English translation of Codex Sinaiticus in a diplomatic edition form. If she can find it, I'll be amazed. So with that in mind, we have to ask ourselves here, is Elizabeth Schofield, 1, being honest? 2, is she seeking to intentionally deceive people? And thirdly, if she professes that it's her job to preach the gospel as a Christian, then should she not have some basic knowledge and information about the Bible itself? I mean, listen, if you're going to have that book in your hand, I expect you to read it. And I hope that Lizzy sits down one day and actually opens that book. And she opens the NIV or her ESV, whatever translation she has, and she looks at the source text that it's taken from. And she's going to realize, for example, if you look at Codex Sinaiticus, it doesn't even describe itself as a gospel when it comes to the Gospel of Matthew. In fact, when it was originally written, the first book of the New Testament, what we today know as Matthew, had no title. The title was simply the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, what you know as verse 1. Technically, this is referred to as an incipit functioning as an inscriptio, meaning the first line of the book is being used as its title. And a later corrector goes back into Codex Sinaiticus, and at the top of the page, they add the words katamation, meaning according to Matthew. So the book goes from having no author to having an author, and at the end of each gospel, in Mark, Luke, and John, that same scribe added in the words Eugelion, Kata, whatever the name of the author was. So it added the word, the gospel according to Mark, Luke, and John. And that's called, the technical word for that is called the subscriptio. And if you look at the gospel attributed to Matthew in Codex Sinaiticus, that's actually left out. So the author only writes that Mark, Luke, and John are Gospels and completely leaves it out in Codex Sinaiticus. If that was Lizzy in the 4th century, she would have probably looked at that and said, well, that's a mistake. What do I do here? You know, why didn't the author write that in here? There are many instances of, well, if you look at scholarship, they'll actually mention that there are several correctors to the script of Codex Sinaiticus going all the way to the 12th century. So she says that her version she has at home, and I hope she can prove that, or she can apologize for intentionally lying if she can prove that she has a translation of Codex Sinaiticus, what is otherwise known as a diplomatic text of Codex Sinaiticus. I will gladly apologize, but I call upon DCCI Ministries, or whatever they want to call themselves, to actually provide evidence of this translation and to inform the British Museum that they have something of academic worth that scholars internationally have not been able to produce themselves. You know, so Lizzy Schofield is either a sensational liar or she is seriously wrong here and committing what I would say is religious fraud. But disregarding those points, going back to the text itself, you look at things, for example, I believe, again, if you go back to the Gospel of Matthew and you read, for example, Matthew chapter 3, verse 7, where it says they were coming to his baptism. Whose baptism were they coming to? Different correctors of Sinaiticus changed the pronouns to infer who it was referring to. You look, for example, at Matthew chapter 3, verse 16. It says, the heavens were opened to him, referring to Jesus. But a different corrector has, the heavens were opened. So someone seeing that text has obviously decided, well, let me make this more personal. Let me infer that, let me directly state that this text refers to the baptism of Jesus, and therefore the heavens were opened, not for God, but for Jesus himself. So you see all these changes in the text, and you have to ask yourself, okay, Lizzy, does your text actually reflect these changes? If not, why not? Does it reflect Codex Bezae, for example, Alexandrinus or Vaticanus? So to say that you have something that does not exist is one, wrong. Two, I think it was just a case of arrogance. And thirdly, what I would call Elizabeth Schofield to do is to study her New Testament before she preaches about it. I get that you believe you have some mandate to do the right thing and to convert people to Christianity, but I think Jesus would expect you to know what he's speaking about and teaching in the first place before speaking about him and making presumptions and lies about a book that you believe speaks about him.